Richard Montgomery commanded a $1 billion empire from his glass tower, convinced that power meant never needing anyone beneath him. But when a single, catastrophic night destroyed everything he'd built, leaving him bankrupt and broken, the only person who offered help was someone he'd barely noticed, his cleaning lady's daughter. And when Zuri quietly asked if she could take a look at his crashed systems, Richard scoffed, because what could a community college student possibly do that his experts couldn't? But there was one critical thing the fallen billionaire didn't know about the young woman standing in his penthouse. The girl he'd just dismissed was about to become either his salvation or the final nail in his coffin, and she was the only person on Earth who could prove that the betrayal came from inside his own boardroom. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. Richard Montgomery stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, 63 stories above the city that had made him a legend. His reflection stared back at him, sharp suit perfectly tailored, silver hair swept back with precision. Below, the streets teemed with people who would never know what it felt like to command an empire worth billions. He smiled faintly, swirling the bourbon in his crystal glass. This was his kingdom, built from nothing but ambition and ruthless intelligence. "Mr. Montgomery?" A nervous voice interrupted his thoughts. Richard turned slowly, his expression cooling. David Harper, his IT director, stood in the doorway, clutching a tablet like a lifeline. The man's forehead glistened with sweat despite the climate-controlled perfection of the office. "This better be important, Harper. I'm finalizing the Westbrook merger in 20 minutes. David stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, it's about the new AI algorithm. Our security team detected some unusual activity in the system. There might be a breach." Richard set down his glass with a soft clink. "Might be. We're not certain yet, but the patterns are concerning. I think we should run a full diagnostic before—" "Before what?" Richard's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Before we close the biggest deal of the decade? Before we revolutionize predictive investment modeling? Harper, do you have any idea what's riding on this launch?" "Yes, sir. But if someone has accessed our core systems, then they'll find the most sophisticated encryption in the industry." Richard picked up a file from his desk, dismissing the concern with a wave. "I didn't build Montgomery Innovations by jumping at shadows. The system is fine. Focus on making sure the presentation runs smoothly tomorrow." David's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." As the IT director left, Richard returned to his windows. Below, the city glittered with possibility. Tomorrow, he would unveil technology that would make him untouchable. Tomorrow, his legacy would be sealed in steel and code. He had no idea that tomorrow would never come. That night, Richard worked late in his office, reviewing projections and investor portfolios. His assistant had left hours ago, the cleaning crew had finished their rounds, and the building hummed with the quiet energy of after-hours ambition. He was alone with his empire, exactly how he liked it. At 11:47, his computer screen flickered. Richard frowned, tapping the keyboard. The screen went black for a moment, then blazed back to life with a cascade of red alerts. Error messages piled on top of each other, scrolling faster than he could read. His phone buzzed violently on the desk. "Montgomery," he answered curtly. "Sir, we have a situation." It was Harper, his voice strained. "The servers are crashing, all of them." Richard's blood went cold. "What do you mean, all of them?" "Every system connected to the AI algorithm is going down. We're trying to isolate the problem, but it's spreading like wildfire." "Sir, I think this is the breach I warned you about." Richard was already moving, grabbing his jacket and heading for the elevators. "I'm coming down. Don't let anyone leave that building until we figure out what's happening." The elevator ride to the server floor felt eternal. When the doors opened, Richard stepped into chaos. Engineers huddled around monitors, their faces pale in the glow of emergency lighting. Smoke drifted from one of the server racks, acrid and bitter. Harper stood in the center of it all, barking orders that seemed to have no effect. "Talk to me," Richard demanded. Harper looked up, his face haggard. "Someone installed a backdoor program months ago. It's been dormant until tonight. Now it's executing commands we can't override. The algorithm is corrupting itself, and it's taking everything else with it. Can we shut it down? We're trying, but whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They're routing through our own security protocols. Every time we close one door, another opens." Harper pulled up a screen showing lines of code racing past. "And sir, there's more. They're not just destroying data. They're copying it." Richard felt the floor shift beneath him. "Copying it where? We don't know yet. But your entire algorithm, every investor file, every proprietary system we've developed, it's all being transmitted somewhere. By the time we trace it, they'll have everything." The night stretched into dawn as Richard watched his empire dismantle itself. By 6 a.m, the damage was catastrophic. Servers had physically burned out from the overload, critical data was corrupted beyond recovery. And worst of all, competitors were already receiving anonymous packages containing Montgomery Innovations' most guarded secrets. The media arrived before breakfast. Richard stood in his office, watching news vans multiply like bacteria outside his building. His phone rang, constantly. Investors, board members, journalists, all demanding answers he didn't have. His assistant hovered nervously by the door, clutching messages she didn't dare deliver. "Mr. Montgomery, the board is demanding an emergency meeting. They're saying—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "Saying what?" "They're saying, you need to resign." The meeting was a massacre. Richard sat at the head of the table he'd commanded for 15 years, facing men he'd mentored, promoted, and trusted. Their faces were cold, calculating. They'd already made their decision. Preston Hale spoke first. Tall, polished, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He'd been Richard's partner since the early days. "Richard, we all respect what you've built here. But the fact is, this breach happened on your watch. Investors are pulling out. Our stock has dropped 40% since midnight. We need decisive action." "Decisive action." Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. "Or a scapegoat." "Don't make this personal," another board member interjected. "This is about protecting the company. The company I built. The company that just lost billions," Preston said smoothly. "Richard, we're offering you a generous severance package. Take it. Walk away with your dignity intact." Richard looked around the table, seeing the truth in their eyes. They weren't offering him anything. They were taking everything. "And if I refuse?" Preston's smile widened. "Then we vote. And I think we both know how that will go." The vote was unanimous, 12-1. Even the men Richard had personally recruited raised their hands against him. Security was already waiting outside the boardroom. "You'll need to surrender your access cards and company devices," Preston said, standing. "We'll have your personal effects sent to your residence." Richard rose slowly, his movements precise despite the rage burning through his veins. He looked at Preston for a long moment, memorizing the satisfaction in the man's eyes. "You planned this. I saved this company from your negligence." Preston gestured to the guards. "Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Montgomery from the building." The walk to the elevator was the longest of Richard's life. Employees he'd never bothered to learn the names of watched him pass, some with pity, others with barely concealed satisfaction. The security guards flanked him like he was a criminal. When the elevator doors closed, shutting out the whispers and stares, Richard finally allowed himself to breathe. Outside, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed in his face, microphones thrust toward him like weapons. "Mr. Montgomery, how does it feel to lose everything?" Is it true you ignored security warnings? Will you face criminal charges? Richard pushed through them without a word, climbing into the back of his town car. The driver, bless him, didn't ask questions. They pulled away from Montgomery Innovations, formerly Montgomery Innovations, in silence. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum. Richard walked through rooms that had once hosted senators and celebrities, now echoing with emptiness. His wife had left 6 months ago, tired of being married to a ghost. His son was gone even longer than that, a loss he'd buried under work and ambition. Now, with nothing to distract him, the silence was deafening. He heard the vacuum before he saw her. Amara Williams had been cleaning his penthouse for 3 years. She was a quiet woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and steady hands. She never asked personal questions, never gossiped, and never expected more than a polite nod. Richard had barely registered her existence beyond ensuring her checks cleared. Now she appeared in the doorway with a cup of tea on a small tray. "Mr. Montgomery, I thought you might need this." Richard looked at the tea, then at her. For the first time, he really saw her. The gentle concern in her face, the careful way she set the cup down, the dignity in her simple uniform. "Thank you, Amara." She nodded, turning to leave, then hesitated. "Sir, if you don't mind me saying, I'm sorry about what happened. It's not right what they did to you." Something in Richard's chest cracked, just slightly. "I appreciate that. My daughter, she's good with computers, studies all that technical stuff at community college." Amara smiled softly. "She's always talking about systems and codes and things I don't understand. If you ever need help with that sort of thing." Richard almost laughed. Help from a community college student, from a cleaning woman's daughter? But he caught himself, swallowing the bitter response. "That's kind of you to offer." Amara left him alone with his tea and his thoughts. Richard didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his home office, staring at financial statements that told a story of complete ruin. The lawsuit from investors would drain whatever assets remained. His accounts were frozen pending investigation. His reputation was destroyed. The next morning, a courier delivered the final blow. A foreclosure notice, stamped and official, giving him 30 days to vacate the premises. Richard held the paper in his hands, reading it 3 times before the words finally registered. Bankrupt, homeless, finished. He heard Amara's voice in the kitchen, speaking quietly on her phone. "No, baby, I know it sounds bad, but he's a good man deep down. He's just lost right now. I don't know what he's going to do. I worry about him being all alone in this big place. Yes, I'll be careful. Love you too." That evening, Richard sat in his darkened living room with a bottle of scotch, watching the city lights blur together. His laptop sat open on the coffee table, the screen blank and mocking. He'd tried to access his old files, his backup systems, anything that might salvage some piece of his empire. Everything was locked, deleted, or corrupted beyond recognition. He didn't hear her approach. "Mr. Montgomery?" Richard turned to find a young woman standing in the archway. She was maybe 20, with intelligent eyes and natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore jeans and a simple sweater and carried a laptop bag over her shoulder. This had to be Amara's daughter. "My mom's worried about you," she said simply. "Asked me to stop by on my way home from class." Richard turned back to his empty screen. "I'm fine." "With respect, sir, you don't look fine." She moved closer, glancing at his laptop. "Is that the system that crashed?" "What's left of it?" There was a pause. Then softly, "Mr. Montgomery, maybe I can take a look." The words hit him like a slap. He almost laughed. This girl, this child who probably learned coding from YouTube videos, thought she could solve problems that his team of experts couldn't. But when he turned to dismiss her, he saw something in her expression that stopped him. Not arrogance, not pity, just quiet confidence. "I don't think you'll be of much help," he said, but the words came out weaker than he intended. She didn't flinch. "Maybe not, but it can't hurt to try, right?" Richard stared at her for a long moment, then gestured at the chair beside him. "Knock yourself out." The next morning, Amara arrived early, her own key jingling in the lock. She'd been doing this for years, arriving before Richard woke to prepare his coffee and tidy the spaces he'd disturbed during the night. But today, she found him in the living room, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups, with her daughter hunched over a laptop beside him. "Zuri? Baby, what are you doing here?" Zuri looked up, her eyes red from staring at screens all night. "Mom, you have to see this. Someone didn't just hack Mr. Montgomery's system. They sabotaged it from the inside. Look at these code fragments. They're deliberate. Someone wanted it to fail." Richard, equally exhausted, pointed at the screen. "Your daughter is either a genius or a miracle worker. I can't decide which." Amara moved closer, anxiety and pride warring on her face. "Zuri, you have class this morning." "Mom, this is more important." Zuri pulled up another window, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "See this signature here? It's embedded in the malware. Whoever did this left their mark, probably thinking no one would find it. But if I can trace it back—" Richard interrupted her, his voice sharp with old habits. "That's not how corporate security works. You can't just trace code like it's a phone number." Zuri didn't even look at him. "Actually, sir, you can. Every programmer has patterns, little habits in how they write code. It's like handwriting. If I can pull enough samples, I can build a profile. That would take weeks, or a few hours if you stop interrupting me." Amara inhaled sharply at her daughter's boldness, but Richard fell silent. He watched Zuri work, her confidence both irritating and fascinating. She moved through his system like she'd built it herself, finding paths he'd never known existed. "There," she said finally, pointing at a string of numbers. "This access point was created 4 months ago. Whoever did this had high-level clearance. They weren't some external hacker. This was someone inside your company." Richard leaned forward. "Can you tell who?" "Not yet, but I can tell you when they logged in, what files they accessed, and when they planted the malware." She pulled up a calendar overlay. "Look at the pattern. Every Friday night, around 11 p.m., always the same terminal." "That's Preston's office," Richard breathed. "His private terminal." "Preston Hale?" Zuri glanced at him. "Your business partner?" "Former partner." Richard's mind raced, pieces falling into place. Preston's eagerness to remove him from the board. The speed at which everything had been prepared. The vote that seemed orchestrated before Richard even arrived. "He set me up." Zuri nodded slowly. "It looks that way. But proving it is going to be harder. This code is sophisticated. He covered his tracks well. But not perfectly," Richard said, something like hope stirring in his chest for the first time in days. "You found his signature. That means there's more to find." "Maybe." Zuri sat back, rubbing her eyes. "But Mr. Montgomery, this isn't just about finding evidence. If Preston has your algorithm, he's probably already using it. By the time we expose him, he could have built an entire empire on your technology." The words stung because they were true. Richard stood, pacing the length of the room. "Then we need to move fast. Can you keep digging?" Zuri hesitated, glancing at her mother. Amara's face was tight with worry. "Baby, maybe you should let the professionals handle this." "Mom, I am a professional. Just because I don't have a fancy degree yet doesn't mean I don't know what I'm doing. It's not about what you know. It's about being safe. These are powerful people, which is exactly why someone needs to stand up to them." Zuri turned to Richard. "Sir, I'll help you. But I need access to your old mainframe, the one at the company headquarters. If Preston left any trace of his plan, it'll be there." Richard shook his head. They've locked me out of everything. I can't even get past the front desk. A small smile crossed Zuri's face. Good thing my mom still has her service entrance key then. That night, the three of them stood in the alley behind Montgomery Innovations. The building loomed above them, glass and steel reflecting the streetlights. Security cameras swept the main entrances, but the service door, used by cleaning crews and maintenance workers, was dark and quiet. Amara's hands shook as she unlocked the door. "If we get caught, we won't," Zuri whispered. "Mom, you know this building better than anyone. Can you get us to the server room without being seen?" Amara nodded reluctantly, leading them through a maze of service corridor. They passed storage rooms and break areas, climbing stairs meant for staff who weren't important, enough for the main elevators. Richard followed in silence, humbled by how much of his own building he'd never bothered to see. The server room was cold and loud, filled with the hum of machines that had survived the crash. Zuri immediately set to work, connecting her laptop to a terminal in the corner. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, commands flowing faster than Richard could follow. "Okay, I'm in," she murmured. "Their security is good, but they're not expecting an attack from inside the building." Richard stood watch by the door while Amara hovered protectively near her daughter. Minutes crawled by, each one feeling like an hour. Somewhere above them, footsteps echoed through the corridors. "Zuri," Richard hissed, "we need to move faster." Almost there. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold. "Just need to—" "Yes." She pulled up a file directory, her eyes widening. "Mr. Montgomery, look at this. Project Falcon. And it has Preston's access signature all over it." Richard moved closer, reading over her shoulder. The files detailed everything. The planned sabotage, the timeline of the breach, even transcripts of Preston's communications with competitors. It was all there, documented with the kind of arrogance that came from assuming you'd never be caught. "Can you copy it?" Zuri was already downloading. Copying to 3 different encrypted drives. "This is it, Mr. Montgomery. This is the proof you need." The footsteps above them grew louder. A door opened somewhere close by. Richard grabbed Zuri's arm. "How much longer?" 30 seconds. The footsteps were right outside now. A radio crackled. "Security to server room, showing an unauthorized access on Terminal 7. 20 seconds. The door handle turned. "Done." Zuri yanked her laptop free, shoving it into her bag. Amara pulled her daughter toward a back exit Richard hadn't even noticed. They ran through the corridors, Amara leading them through a path she'd walked 1,000 times before. Behind them, shouts echoed and radios squawked. They burst out into the alley just as security flooded the server room. Richard's heart hammered as they walked quickly toward Amara's old sedan parked a block away. They didn't run. Running would draw attention. They just moved with purpose. 3 people who had every reason to be walking these streets at night. Only when they were safely inside the car, pulling away from the building, did Richard allow himself to breathe. In the back seat, Zuri clutched her laptop like a lifeline, a grin spreading across her face. "That was insane," she whispered. Amara gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "Don't you ever make me do something like that again." But even as she scolded, Richard saw the hint of a smile on her face. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd found the evidence that could change everything. Richard looked at Zuri through the rearview mirror. "When you said you knew about computer stuff, you undersold yourself." She met his eyes. "People usually underestimate me, Mr. Montgomery. I'm used to it." The words carried weight, and Richard felt shame settle in his chest. How many people had he underestimated over the years? How many brilliant minds had he dismissed because they didn't fit his narrow definition of worth? "I won't make that mistake again," he said quietly. Zuri nodded, turning her attention back to her laptop. As Amara drove them through the sleeping city, Richard watched the building that had been his entire world fade into the distance. For the first time since the crash, he didn't feel like a man who'd lost everything. He felt like a man who might just win it back. After their narrow escape from Montgomery Innovations, Richard found himself in unfamiliar territory. Amara's modest two-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood far from the glass towers of his former life. The living room had become their makeshift operations center, with Zuri's laptop and scattered papers covering every available surface. Richard sat on the worn couch, watching Zuri decrypt files with the kind of focused intensity he once reserved for boardroom negotiations. Amara moved quietly in the kitchen, preparing coffee for the long night ahead. The apartment smelled of vanilla candles and home cooking, such a stark contrast to his sterile penthouse that Richard felt disoriented. "Mr. Montgomery, you need to see this," Zuri said, pulling up a document on her screen. Richard moved beside her, reading the encrypted communications she'd uncovered. They were emails between Preston and 3 other board members, discussing the takeover months before the crash. The conspiracy went deeper than he'd imagined. "They planned everything," Zuri said quietly. The breach was just the trigger. They'd been positioning themselves to take control for almost a year. Richard's jaw tightened. "Preston was always ambitious. I thought I was mentoring him. Turns out I was just convenient. There's more." Zuri opened another file. "He's been communicating with your competitors. He sold them pieces of your algorithm even before the crash. He wasn't just stealing your company. He was selling you out piece by piece." The betrayal cut deeper than Richard expected. Preston had been at his wedding. He'd held Richard's son when he was born. They'd built something together, or so Richard had believed. Now he saw the truth. Preston had been waiting for the right moment to strike, and Richard's arrogance had given him the perfect opening. "Can we use this in court?" Richard asked. "Maybe. But we need more than just emails. We need to show the direct connection between Preston's access and the sabotage code." Zuri scrolled through lines of programming. "The problem is, he used proxy servers and routed everything through multiple locations. It's like trying to follow footprints through a rainstorm." Amara appeared with 3 mugs of coffee, setting them down carefully. "Zuri, baby, you've been staring at that screen for 6 hours. You need rest." "Mom, I'm fine." "No, your mother's right," Richard said, surprising himself. "We all need to step back and think clearly. Exhaustion leads to mistakes." Zuri looked at him with raised eyebrows. "Is this the same man who used to work 30-hour stretches?" "That man lost everything," Richard said softly. "I'm trying to be smarter this time." They took a break, sitting around Amara's small dining table with coffee and leftover casserole she insisted Richard eat. The domesticity of it all felt strange. He couldn't remember the last time he'd sat at someone's kitchen table, sharing a simple meal without business being discussed. "Mr. Montgomery," Amara said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you build it? The company, I mean. What were you trying to prove?" Richard stared into his coffee, the question hitting harder than expected. "I grew up with nothing. My father was a janitor, my mother cleaned houses." He stopped, realizing what he'd just said. He looked at Amara, seeing her differently. "I spent my whole life trying to get as far from that as possible. I thought success meant distance from where I started." "And now?" Amara asked gently. "Now I'm sitting in your kitchen, eating casserole, and realizing that the person who worked the hardest to destroy me came from privilege, while the people helping me rebuild are the ones I spent years overlooking." Richard met her eyes. "I'm sorry, Amara, for every time I didn't see you, for every time I treated you like furniture instead of a person." Amara reached across the table, patting his hand. "We all have our journeys, Mr. Montgomery. What matters is where we end up, not where we've been." Zuri watched the exchange quietly, something softening in her expression. She'd been prepared to dislike this man, to help him out of obligation to her mother. But seeing his humility, his genuine remorse, it changed things. "Okay," she said, pushing back from the table. "I think I know how to trace Preston's connection, but it's going to require accessing the backup servers at the company, the ones they don't think anyone knows about." Richard frowned. "There are no backup servers. Everything was centralized." "That you knew about." Zuri smiled slightly. "But every IT director worth anything keeps secret backups. I'd bet money your guy Harper has emergency servers somewhere off-site. If we can find them, we can trace every action Preston took without him knowing we're looking." "How do we find them?" "We ask Harper." Richard shook his head. "He won't help. He works for Preston now." "Does he?" Zuri pulled up Harper's employee file on her laptop. "Because according to this, he submitted his resignation 2 days after you were removed. He never officially left, but he stopped showing up. That doesn't sound like someone happy with the new management." The next morning, they tracked David Harper to a small coffee shop downtown. He sat alone in the corner, looking like he hadn't slept in days. When Richard approached, Harper's head snapped up, fear and guilt warring on his face. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm not here to blame you, Harper," Richard said, sitting down uninvited. "I'm here because I need your help." Harper glanced around nervously. "I can't be seen talking to you. Preston made it very clear what happens to people who cross him." "Did he threaten you?" Harper's silence was answer enough. Zuri slid into the seat beside Richard. "Mr. Harper, do you have backup servers? Somewhere Preston doesn't know about?" Harper stared at her, confused. "Who are you?" "Someone trying to fix the mess your boss made," Zuri said bluntly. "Those backups could have evidence Preston can't erase. We need access to them." Harper's hands shook around his coffee cup. "If I help you and Preston finds out, I'm finished. Not just my career. He'll make sure I never work in tech again. And if you don't help us, you'll spend the rest of your life knowing you let a criminal get away with destroying a company and ruining innocent lives," Richard said quietly. "I ignored your warnings, Harper. That's on me. But you have a chance now to do the right thing. Don't let fear stop you." Harper was silent for a long moment, then pulled out a piece of paper and scribbled an address. "There's a storage facility in Newark, Unit 247. The servers are there, but they're encrypted. You'll need this code to access them." He wrote a string of numbers below the address. "Thank you," Richard said sincerely. "I should have done more," Harper whispered. "When I saw the code being planted, I should have fought harder to make you listen." "We both made mistakes," Richard acknowledged. "Let's make sure they count for something." The storage facility was a gray concrete building in an industrial area, the kind of place people stored things they wanted to forget. Richard, Zuri, and Amara found Unit 247 at the back of the 3rd floor. Inside, surrounded by dusty boxes and old furniture, sat 3 server towers humming quietly in the darkness. Zuri immediately got to work, her laptop connecting to the first server with practiced ease. "This is it. This is everything. Every email, every access log, every line of code that touched your system in the last 2 years. Can you prove Preston planted the malware?" Richard asked. "Give me time." Zuri's fingers flew across the keyboard. "I need to cross-reference the timestamps with the malware signature and match them to Preston's access patterns. It's like building a puzzle from 1,000 pieces." Hours passed. Amara brought sandwiches from a deli down the street. Richard paced the small space, feeling useless as Zuri worked her magic. He'd spent his whole life being the smartest person in the room, the one with all the answers. Now he was completely dependent on a 20-year-old who'd taught herself coding from library books and online courses. "Got it," Zuri said suddenly, her voice tight with excitement. "Mr. Montgomery, look at this." On her screen was a complete timeline of Preston's actions. Every access point, every file modification, every communication with outside parties. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. Preston had systematically dismantled Montgomery Innovations from the inside, sold its secrets to competitors, and orchestrated Richard's downfall with surgical precision. "This is admissible in court?" Richard asked. "It should be. These are official company servers with time-stamped logs. As long as we can prove these servers are legitimate backups, this evidence will hold up." Richard felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Real, tangible hope that justice might actually be possible. He looked at Zuri, this remarkable young woman who'd seen past his failures to help him anyway, and felt humility wash over him. "Zuri," he said carefully, "when this is over, when we've exposed Preston and cleared my name, I want to rebuild. But not the same company. Something better. Something that actually matters." He paused, choosing his words. "I want you to be my partner, equal partner. Not an employee, not an assistant. A full partner in whatever we build next." Zuri stared at him, disbelief written across her face. "Mr. Montgomery, I haven't even finished my degree. You don't need a degree. You need vision and integrity, and you have both." Richard glanced at Amara, who watched her daughter with tears in her eyes. "I spent my whole life believing success meant corner offices and expensive suits. I was wrong. Success means building something that matters with people who actually give a damn. Will you help me do that?" Zuri looked at her mother. Amara nodded, smiling through her tears. "Baby, this is your decision. But whatever you choose, I'm proud of you." "I don't trust the corporate world," Zuri said honestly. "I've seen what it does to people." "Then help me build one that deserves your trust," Richard said. "No boardrooms full of sharks. No cutting corners or crushing competition. Just honest innovation with people who care about making things better. If I'm going to rebuild, I want to do it right this time." Zuri extended her hand. "Equal partners. That means equal say in all decisions." Richard shook her hand firmly. "Equal partners." Over the next 2 weeks, they worked from Amara's apartment, refining the evidence and preparing their case. Richard reached out to a lawyer he'd known for years, someone who'd left corporate law to work in civil rights because, as she put it, "I wanted to sleep at night." Jennifer Walsh listened to their story with growing anger. "Preston Hale did all this. I always knew he was ambitious, but this is criminal." "Can we win?" Richard asked. "With this evidence, absolutely. But Richard, you need to prepare yourself. This will be ugly. Preston will fight back with everything he has. He'll try to destroy your credibility, question your mental state, and drag your name through the mud all over again." "Let him try," Richard said quietly. "I've got nothing left to lose." "Actually, you do." Jennifer looked at Zuri. "He'll come after you too. He'll claim you hacked the servers, that you planted evidence, that you're some delusional hacker trying to extort money. It won't be pretty." Zuri lifted her chin. "I can handle it." "I hope so," Jennifer said seriously, "because once we file this lawsuit, there's no going back." They filed the next day. The media eruption was immediate and overwhelming. "Disgraced CEO claims conspiracy. Montgomery fights back against former partner. Tech industry rocked by sabotage allegations." Preston held a press conference within hours, standing before cameras with the wounded dignity of the falsely accused. "These allegations are completely baseless. Richard Montgomery is a desperate man trying to blame others for his own failures. I'm confident the courts will see through this pathetic attempt at revenge." But behind the scenes, Preston was panicking. His lawyers filed motion after motion trying to suppress the evidence, claiming the servers were illegally accessed. They argued that Zuri had no authority to retrieve company data, that Richard's access had been revoked, that everything they presented was inadmissible. "They're scared," Jennifer said during a strategy meeting. "When people are innocent, they welcome evidence. When they're guilty, they try to bury it." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Richard and Zuri began rebuilding in the only way that made sense, from the ground up. They started small, reaching out to former Montgomery Innovations employees who'd been laid off when Preston took over. "We can't pay much right now," Richard told a room full of talented engineers and developers. "Actually, we can't pay anything. But what I can offer is equity in something new, something built on integrity instead of ego. If you believe in second chances, for this company and for me, then help us build something worth believing in." To his surprise, most of them stayed. They worked from Amara's apartment, then from a rented garage space when they ran out of room. Zuri led the technical development while Richard handled the business side. But this time he listened more than he talked. He learned names. He remembered birthdays. He brought coffee and cleaned up after meetings. Amara watched it all with quiet pride, seeing her daughter command respect from people twice her age, watching Richard transform from an arrogant executive into someone who understood that leadership meant service, not authority. "You're doing good, baby," she told Zuri one night as they cleaned up after everyone left. "I'm terrified," Zuri admitted. "What if I'm not smart enough? What if I fail everyone who believed in me?" "Then you'll learn and try again," Amara said simply. "That's what your grandmother always told me. Success isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up." The algorithm they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of the aggressive predictive modeling Richard had pushed before, designed to maximize profits at any cost, this version emphasized ethical investment patterns. It flagged companies engaged in worker exploitation or environmental destruction. It prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term gains. "This isn't what investors want," one of the developers pointed out. "They want maximum returns, not moral lectures." "Then we'll find different investors," Richard said. "People who understand that sustainable success means considering more than just quarterly profits." The first investor who believed them was a small non-profit focused on ethical business practices. They provided $50,000 in seed funding, barely enough to keep the lights on, but it was a start. Then a tech blogger wrote about their project, praising the innovative approach to algorithmic ethics. The article went viral, and suddenly they had attention they couldn't have bought. More investors called. Small ones at first, then mid-sized venture capital firms intrigued by the ethical angle. Richard turned down anyone whose values didn't align with their mission. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done, walking away from money because it came with strings attached. But Zuri wouldn't compromise, and he'd learned to trust her judgment. "You're building something real this time," Jennifer told him during one of their strategy sessions. "The old Montgomery Innovations was impressive, but it was hollow. This has substance." "I have Zuri to thank for that," Richard said. "She refuses to cut corners." "She learned that from her mother," Jennifer observed. "Amara's been doing honest work in a dishonest world her whole life. That kind of integrity doesn't come from privilege, it comes from principle." 3 weeks before the trial, Preston made his move. One of Richard's new investors received an anonymous email claiming Zuri had a criminal record for hacking. Another got a doctored photo supposedly showing Richard paying off witnesses. The smear campaign was sophisticated and relentless. "He's trying to destroy us before we even get to court," Zuri said, staring at the fabricated evidence circulating online. "Can we fight it?" Richard asked. "We can try, but rumors spread faster than truth." Zuri's fingers tightened around her phone. "He's calling me a criminal, Mr. Montgomery. People are saying I seduced you, that I'm using my mother's position to extort you. The things they're saying about my family." Her voice broke, and Amara immediately wrapped her arms around her daughter. Richard felt rage burn through him, not for himself, but for this young woman who'd sacrificed her peace to help him, and was now being torn apart by people who'd never built anything but lies. "We go on record," he said firmly. "All of us. We tell the truth completely and publicly. We show them exactly who we are and what we're building. If Preston wants to fight dirty, fine, but we're going to fight with truth. They held their own press conference the next day. No prepared statements, no media handlers. Just Richard, Zuri, and Amara sitting at a borrowed table in their garage workspace, surrounded by the computers and cables of their startup. "My name is Richard Montgomery," he began, looking directly into the cameras. 6 weeks ago, I was removed from my own company after a cyber attack destroyed everything I'd built. The easy thing would have been to give up, to accept that I'd lost and move on. But two people, Amara Williams and her daughter Zuri, showed me another path. He gestured to Zuri. This young woman, who I initially dismissed and underestimated, proved to be smarter and more capable than any executive I ever hired. She uncovered evidence of deliberate sabotage, traced it back to my former partner, and did it all without breaking a single law. Now, because she had the courage to stand up for what's right, she's being attacked by people who want to silence the truth. Zuri spoke next, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "I'm not a criminal. I'm a student who happens to be good with computers. When I saw someone in pain, I tried to help. That's all. My mother taught me that we help people when they're down, regardless of who they are or what they have. I didn't help Mr. Montgomery for money or recognition. I helped him because it was right." Amara had the final word, speaking with the quiet dignity of someone who'd spent a lifetime being overlooked. "I've cleaned houses and offices for 25 years. I've seen how powerful people treat those they consider beneath them. But I've also seen that power and wealth don't make you better than anyone else. What makes you better is how you treat people when you have nothing to gain from it. Richard Montgomery is learning that lesson. My daughter has always known it, and that's why we're standing here together." The press conference went viral within hours. Social media exploded with support, with people sharing their own stories of being underestimated or dismissed. The narrative shifted from "disgraced CEO strikes back" to "unlikely alliance fights corruption." Investment offers poured in, real ones this time, from people who believed in what they were building. Within a week, they had enough funding to move out of the garage and into actual office space. Nothing fancy, just a renovated community center in a neighborhood that needed revitalization. But it was theirs, built on honesty and hard work. Richard stood in the empty space on move-in day, watching Zuri direct the installation of their servers while Amara organized the kitchen area they'd insisted on including. This felt different from his old empire. Smaller, yes. Humbler, but infinitely more meaningful. "What are you going to call it?" Amara asked, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee. Richard smiled, watching. Her daughter commanded respect from the technicians twice her age. "I was thinking Amara Technologies, after the woman who taught me that real strength doesn't come from corner offices. It comes from showing up with integrity every single day." Amara's eyes filled with tears. "Richard, you don't have to." "I want to," he said sincerely. "You gave me a place to land when I fell. You shared your home, your daughter's brilliance, and your time without asking for anything in return. The least I can do is make sure everyone knows where this company's heart really came from." "Then it should be Amara Technologies," Zuri said, joining them. "But Mom, you're on the board. Equal say with me and Mr. Montgomery." "Baby, I don't know anything about running a tech company." "No," Richard agreed, "but you know about running an ethical one. You know about treating people with dignity and leading with compassion. That's what we need most." Amara looked between them, overwhelmed and proud in equal measure. "Then I guess we better make sure this company lives up to its name." As they stood together in their new space, watching the sun set through the windows, Richard felt something he'd lost years ago. Purpose. Not the hollow satisfaction of accumulating wealth, but the deep fulfillment of building something that mattered with people who genuinely cared. The trial was coming. Preston would fight with everything he had. But standing here, in this modest office with these remarkable women, Richard finally understood what real power looked like. It looked like a cleaning woman's dignity, a young coder's brilliance, and a humbled billionaire learning that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what actually matters. The morning of the trial arrived with unseasonable cold, as if the city itself understood the weight of what was about to unfold. Richard stood before the mirror in his hotel room, adjusting a tie he'd borrowed from one of his former employees. His penthouse had been seized weeks ago, and he'd been living in a modest extended-stay hotel near the courthouse. The man staring back at him looked different, leaner, older, but somehow more present than the billionaire who'd once commanded boardrooms. Zuri knocked softly on his door. "Mr. Montgomery, the car's here." They rode to the courthouse in silence. Richard, Zuri, Amara, and Jennifer Walsh. Outside, reporters had already gathered in thick clusters, cameras ready to capture every moment. The media had turned this trial into a spectacle, framing it as David versus Goliath, though Richard wasn't sure which role he was supposed to play anymore. "Remember," Jennifer said as they approached the courthouse steps, "stay calm, answer only what's asked, and trust the evidence. Preston's team will try to rattle you. Don't let them." The courthouse hallway buzzed with anticipation. Richard spotted Preston immediately, standing near the entrance to the courtroom, surrounded by his legal team like a general with his lieutenants. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, his expression radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having faced real consequences. Their eyes met across the corridor. Preston smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. Then his gaze shifted to Zuri, and something darker flickered across his face. Richard felt protective anger surge through him, but Amara's hand on his arm steadied him. "Don't give him what he wants," she whispered. "We win by staying true to who we are." The courtroom was packed. Every seat in the gallery filled with journalists, former employees, investors, and curious onlookers who'd followed the story through social media. Judge Catherine Morrison entered, her gray hair pulled back severely, her expression unreadable. She was known for running a tight courtroom and suffering no foolishness from either side. "All rise," the bailiff called. The trial began with opening statements. Preston's lead attorney, Marcus Blackwell, stood with practiced grace. He was exactly the kind of lawyer Richard had once hired, expensive, polished, and ruthless. "Your Honor, what we have here is a simple case of professional jealousy and delusion," Blackwell began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Richard Montgomery built a successful company, then watched it crumble due to his own negligence and poor judgment. Rather than accept responsibility, he's concocted an elaborate conspiracy theory, dragging innocent people into his vendetta. My client, Preston Hale, has done nothing but try to save Montgomery Innovations from complete destruction. For his efforts, he's been falsely accused and publicly slandered." Blackwell gestured dismissively toward their table. "The plaintiffs will present evidence they claim proves sabotage. But this evidence was obtained through questionable means by an untrained college student with no credentials, no authority, and no understanding of proper investigative procedures. This isn't a case about corporate conspiracy. It's about a fallen executive trying to blame everyone but himself." Jennifer stood for their opening statement, her posture straight and voice clear. "Your Honor, over the next few days, we will prove beyond doubt that Preston Hale engaged in a systematic, premeditated campaign to destroy Montgomery Innovations and steal its proprietary technology. We will show you time-stamped evidence, documented communications, and technical proof that Mr. Hale deliberately planted malware in company systems, leaked confidential information to competitors, and orchestrated Mr. Montgomery's removal from the company he built." She walked toward the jury box, making eye contact with each member. "You will hear testimony from a young woman named Zuri Williams who had the skill and courage to uncover what trained professionals missed. You'll see evidence that Mr. Hale tried to bury, and you'll understand that this case isn't about revenge or jealousy. It's about holding powerful people accountable when they abuse the trust placed in them." The first day consisted of technical testimony. IT experts explaining server logs, security protocols, and the timeline of the system breach. Richard watched Preston throughout, noting how his former partner maintained perfect composure, occasionally whispering to his attorneys with the casual confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. Day 2 brought witnesses. Former Montgomery Innovations employees testified about Preston's behavior in the months leading up to the crash. His unusual interest in security protocols, late-night access to restricted systems, and the meetings he held without Richard's knowledge. Mr. Hale was always ambitious, testified Sarah Mitchell, a former project manager. But after Mr. Montgomery announced the new AI algorithm, Preston's whole demeanor changed. He started making comments about how Richard didn't appreciate the team's contributions, how he took all the credit. He was planting seeds, making us question our loyalty. On cross-examination, Blackwell tore into her testimony. Ms. Mitchell, isn't it true you were fired from Montgomery Innovations for poor performance? I was laid off when Preston took over, along with 40 other people. Laid off or fired, semantics aside, you have reason to resent Mr. Hale, don't you? I resent being used as a pawn in his scheme to steal a company. The exchange continued, brutal and precise. Blackwell was good at his job, twisting every testimony to cast doubt. By the afternoon recess, Richard could see the strain on their witnesses' faces. This was exactly what Preston's team wanted, to exhaust them, to make them question their own memories and motives. They're trying to wear us down, Zuri observed during the break. Make everyone too tired to fight back. Then we don't let them, Richard said firmly. Tomorrow you testify. You show them what real strength looks like. That night, Preston's team made their move. Richard returned to his hotel to find an envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a single photograph. Zuri leaving a bar near campus, the image deliberately composed to look compromising. With it came a note typed on plain paper. Withdraw your case, or everyone learns about your employees' interesting extracurriculars. Richard's hands shook with rage. He immediately called Jennifer, who arrived within 30 minutes along with Zuri and Amara. It's fake, Zuri said after examining the photo. That's not even me. The face is wrong, the proportions are off. They photoshopped someone else's body with a picture of my face. Can you prove it? Jennifer asked. Easily. But that's not the point, is it? Zuri looked at Richard with surprising calm. They're trying to scare us. Make us withdraw because they know we're winning. They threatened you, Richard said, his voice tight. They're going after you personally. And we're going to use it against them, Jennifer said, taking the envelope carefully. This is evidence of witness intimidation, attempted blackmail. We take this to Judge Morrison first thing in the morning. But Amara was quiet, her face pale with worry. Baby, maybe we should think about this. These people are dangerous. Mom, if we back down now, they win. They'll keep doing this to other people and no one will ever stand up to them because everyone's too scared. Zuri took her mother's hands. I know you're worried, but you taught me to do what's right even when it's hard. This is hard, but it's right. Amara pulled her daughter close, tears sliding down her cheeks. I know. I just wish the world wasn't so cruel to people who try to do good. The next morning, Jennifer presented the threatening envelope to Judge Morrison in chambers, with both legal teams present. The judge's expression darkened as she examined the evidence. Mr. Blackwell, she said coldly, does your client know anything about this? Absolutely not, Your Honor. This is clearly the work of some overzealous supporter, not— Save it. Judge Morrison cut him off. I'm giving you until end of business today to find out where this came from. If I discover anyone associated with your team had anything to do with this, I will hold them in contempt and refer the matter for criminal prosecution. Are we clear? Yes, Your Honor. And let me be perfectly clear to everyone in this room. Any further attempts to intimidate witnesses will result in immediate sanctions. This is a court of law, not a schoolyard. We will conduct ourselves accordingly. When Zuri took the stand later that morning, the courtroom was electric with tension. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back, no makeup except what Amara had insisted on to help with the camera lights. She looked young but composed, her hands steady as she swore the oath. Jennifer began with gentle questions, establishing Zuri's background and expertise. Ms. Williams, can you tell the court about your education in computer science? I'm currently in my third year at community college, studying computer systems and cybersecurity. I've also completed several advanced online certifications in network security and forensic analysis. And what sparked your interest in this field? Zuri smiled slightly. When I was 15, my mom's bank account was hacked. We lost $300 we couldn't afford to lose. I taught myself enough about computer systems to trace the hacker and report them to the FBI. We got our money back, and I got hooked on understanding how digital systems work. Can you describe your involvement in this case? My mother works as a housekeeper for Mr. Montgomery. After his company collapsed, she was worried about him. She asked if I could look at his computer system, see if there was anything salvageable. When I started examining the code, I realized the crash wasn't accidental. It was deliberately engineered. Jennifer walked her through the technical details, how she'd identified the malware signature, traced the access points, and built a timeline of Preston's actions. Zuri explained each step clearly, using language that even non-technical jury members could understand. She was patient, thorough, and unshakable. Then Blackwell stood for cross-examination. Ms. Williams, he began, his tone dripping with condescension. You're 20 years old, is that correct? Yes. You attend community college, not a prestigious university like MIT or Stanford. That's correct. In fact, you couldn't afford to attend a 4-year university, could you? Jennifer shot to her feet. Objection, relevance. Your Honor, I'm establishing the witness's credentials. Overruled. But make your point quickly, Mr. Blackwell. Blackwell smiled. Ms. Williams, isn't it true that you have no formal degree, no professional certifications from recognized institutions, and no actual work experience in cybersecurity? I have certifications from several online certifications, self-paced courses anyone can take. Not exactly the same as a degree from a real university, is it? Zuri's expression didn't change. Some of the best programmers in the world are self-taught. Credentials don't determine skill. Results do. Results? Blackwell laughed. You're testifying about highly complex corporate systems based on training you got from internet videos. Tell me, Ms. Williams, who's paying you to testify today? No one. I'm not being paid. Really? Because you're now listed as a partner in Mr. Montgomery's new company, aren't you? Amara Technologies. That sounds like payment to me. I'm a partner because I helped build the company, not because I testified. How convenient. Blackwell paced before the witness stand. Let's talk about how you obtained this evidence. You accessed company servers without authorization, didn't you? I accessed backup servers with information from the former IT director. Backup servers that were company property. Property you had no legal right to access. The company was stolen from its rightful owner through illegal means. I was helping recover evidence of that theft. That's not for you to decide, Ms. Williams. You're not a lawyer, you're not a judge, and you're certainly not law enforcement. You're just a girl playing hacker, breaking into secure systems because you thought you were smarter than everyone else. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. Mr. Blackwell, watch your tone. But Blackwell pressed on. Your mother cleans Mr. Montgomery's home, correct? She must have been devastated when her employer lost everything. Did she convince you to help? Perhaps even suggest there might be financial rewards if you could somehow prove a conspiracy. Zuri's composure finally cracked, not with anger, but with something more powerful. Absolute certainty. My mother is the most honest person I know. She taught me that character. isn't about what you do when people are watching. It's about what you do when no one will ever know. She's spent her entire life doing honest work for people who never even learned her name. So no, Mr. Blackwell, she didn't convince me to lie. She taught me to tell the truth, even when it's inconvenient. That's what I'm doing now. The courtroom fell silent. Even Blackwell seemed momentarily thrown. Zuri continued, her voice steady and clear. You're right that I'm young. You're right that I don't have fancy degrees or impressive credentials. But I know code, the way some people know music or art. I can see patterns where others see noise. And what I saw in Montgomery Innovation's system was clear, deliberate sabotage with Preston Hale's fingerprints all over it. You can question my credentials all you want, but you can't change what the evidence shows. I have no further questions, Blackwell said stiffly, returning to his seat. Jennifer stood for redirect. Ms. Williams, can you explain to the jury what a digital signature is? It's like a fingerprint left in code. Every programmer has habits, ways they structure commands, comments they leave, shortcuts they prefer. These patterns are as unique as handwriting. And you found Preston Hale's digital signature in the malware that destroyed Montgomery Innovations. Not just found it, I found it dozens of times across multiple files, all time-stamped to periods when Mr. Hale had exclusive access to the systems. The probability of someone else mimicking his exact programming style at the exact times he was logged in approaches zero. Jennifer displayed the evidence on screens throughout the courtroom. Lines of code with highlighted sections showing identical patterns across different files. Can you explain what we're seeing? These are 3 different pieces of malware planted at different times. Notice how they all use the same variable naming conventions, the same commenting style, and the same unusual approach to error handling. This isn't coincidence. This is one person's work, repeated across months. The jury leaned forward, studying the screens. Even those without technical knowledge could see the patterns, the repetition, the deliberate consistency. Thank you, Ms. Williams. No further questions. As Zuri stepped down from the witness stand, she walked past Preston's table. He stared at her with undisguised hatred, his mask of confidence finally slipping. Zuri met his gaze without flinching, then took her seat beside Richard. You were magnificent, Richard whispered. I just told the truth, she whispered back. The trial continued for 3 more days. Expert witnesses confirmed Zuri's analysis. The FBI agent who'd examined the backup servers testified that the evidence was authentic and properly preserved. Preston's own employees described his increasingly erratic behavior after the crash, including one assistant who testified about seeing Preston delete files and wipe hard drives in a panic. When Preston took the stand, Jennifer methodically dismantled his testimony. Every explanation he gave contradicted documented evidence. Every alibi fell apart under scrutiny. He claimed the access logs were falsified, but couldn't explain how. He suggested Richard had planted evidence, but had no proof. By the time he stepped down, even his own lawyers looked uncertain. The closing arguments were brief. Jennifer presented a clear timeline of Preston's conspiracy, backed by irrefutable evidence. Blackwell tried to cast doubt, arguing reasonable explanations for every piece of evidence, but his arguments felt hollow against the weight of proof. Judge Morrison instructed the jury and sent them to deliberate. 24 hours later, they returned. Have you reached a verdict? The judge asked. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of corporate sabotage, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of theft of proprietary information? Guilty. On the charge of fraud? Guilty. The courtroom exploded with noise. Preston went pale, gripping the table as if it was the only thing keeping him upright. His lawyers immediately began calling for appeals, but Judge Morrison silenced them with her gavel. Mr. Hale, this court finds you guilty on all counts. Sentencing will be scheduled for 3 weeks from today. In the meantime, you will surrender your passport and remain under electronic monitoring. She turned to Richard. Mr. Montgomery, The court also rules in your favor on all civil claims. Full ownership of the algorithm and associated intellectual property is restored to you, along with compensatory damages in the amount of... Richard stood, interrupting the judge. Your Honor, if I may? Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. Mr. Montgomery? I don't want the money. I want it donated to scholarships for students from underprivileged backgrounds pursuing technology degrees. Students like Zuri Williams who have the talent but not the means. The judge smiled, the first genuine smile Richard had seen from her. A noble gesture, Mr. Montgomery. The court approves. Is there anything else? Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to request that Ms. Zuri Williams be officially recognized as co-creator of the algorithm. Her contributions to its development and recovery should be part of the legal record. Granted. Ms. Williams, congratulations on your official recognition. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed them with questions, but Richard only stopped long enough for a brief statement. Justice was served today, not just for me, but for everyone who's been told they're not good enough, smart enough, or important enough to matter. This victory belongs to a young woman who refused to be silenced, and a mother who taught her that integrity is worth more than comfort. Thank you. That night should have been celebratory, but Richard couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Preston had been too quiet at the verdict, too controlled. Men, like him, didn't accept defeat gracefully. They struck back. His instinct proved correct. At 2 in the morning, Richard's phone rang. Jennifer's voice was tight with urgency. Richard, there's been an incident. Someone tried to break into Amara Technologies' office. The security system triggered, police responded, but whoever it was got away. Richard was dressed and out the door in minutes. He arrived at their office to find police vehicles blocking the street, their lights painting the building in alternating red and blue. Inside, files had been scattered, computers overturned, server cables ripped out. It was a message, not a robbery. Zuri stood in the center of the chaos, her laptop clutched to her chest, her face pale but determined. Amara held her daughter's shoulders, her expression fierce with protective anger. They were looking for the evidence backups, Zuri said when Richard approached. They smashed the main servers, but they didn't find what they were looking for. Because you moved it, Richard guessed. Because I always have backups of backups. 3 encrypted drives in 3 different locations, all uploaded to secure cloud storage with redundant fail-safes. She managed a weak smile. You can't be paranoid when it turns out they really are after you. Detective Maria Williams, no relation to Amara and Zuri, despite the shared surname, took their statements. We've got footage of 2 men fleeing the scene. Masks, gloves, professionals. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone hired them. Preston Hale, Richard said. We can't prove that yet, the detective cautioned. But given the timing right after the verdict, we're definitely looking at him closely. His electronic monitoring shows he was home all night, but that doesn't mean he couldn't have arranged it. What do we do? Amara asked. You stay vigilant. We'll increase patrols in this area, and I'd recommend private security for all 3 of you, until we make arrests. After the police left, Richard, Zuri, and Amara sat in the damaged office, too wired to sleep. The sun was starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of gray and pink. He won't stop, Zuri said quietly. The verdict didn't change anything. He'll keep coming after us. Then we make sure everyone knows he's coming, Richard replied. He pulled out his phone and composed a message to every media contact he had. Within an hour, the story was breaking on news sites across the country. Convicted saboteur strikes back, office break-in following guilty verdict. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with support for Amara Technologies and calls for Preston's immediate arrest. By noon, the FBI had opened an investigation into witness intimidation and potential conspiracy to commit further crimes. Preston's lawyers issued a statement denying all involvement, but the damage was done. Investors abandoned him. His remaining business partners cut ties. The companies that had purchased stolen technology from him faced their own investigations. That evening, as Richard helped Zuri and Amara clean up the office, his phone rang with an unknown number. "Montgomery," he answered. "You've destroyed me." Preston's voice was barely recognizable, raw, broken, desperate. "Everything I built, everything I worked for, gone." "You destroyed yourself, Preston. I just made sure everyone could see what you really were. I gave you everything. I made you successful. Without me, you'd still be hustling small contracts. Without you, I'd still have my integrity," Richard said quietly. "We could have built something great together. Instead, you chose betrayal. Don't lecture me about morality. You were just as ruthless as I am. The only difference is you got caught." "No," Richard corrected. "The difference is I learned something from falling. You're still blaming everyone but yourself." There was a long silence. Then Preston laughed, a bitter sound devoid of humor. "You think you've won? This isn't over. I still have connections, resources, options you can't imagine." "Then use them to become a better person," Richard said. "Because if you keep fighting, you'll lose everything you have left." He hung up before Preston could respond. "Was that him?" Zuri asked. "Yes." "What did he say?" Richard looked at the two women who'd saved him from his own arrogance and gave him a chance at redemption. "Nothing worth repeating. Let's focus on rebuilding. That's the best revenge, not destroying him, but building something so good that his downfall becomes irrelevant." Over the next 2 weeks, they repaired the office, upgraded their security, and threw themselves into work. The story of their victory had spread, bringing attention and opportunities they hadn't anticipated. Universities invited Zuri to speak about cybersecurity. Investors offered funding with no strings attached. Former Montgomery Innovations employees who'd been scattered after the crash reached out, asking to join the team. But the most meaningful moment came when Amara's name was officially added to the company charter as co-founder. Jennifer presented them with the legal documents during a small ceremony in their repaired office. Amara Technologies is now officially recognized as a company founded by Richard Montgomery, Zuri Williams, and Amara Williams, Jennifer announced. "Equal ownership, equal authority, equal everything." Amara held the document with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. "I cleaned floors my whole life. I never thought—" "You did more than clean floors, Mom," Zuri said, hugging her. "You raised me. You taught me about dignity and strength. You gave Mr. Montgomery a place to rebuild. If anyone deserves to have their name on this company, it's you." Richard nodded. "This company exists because of your kindness, Amara. We're just making sure the world knows it." As they stood together in their modest office, surrounded by the people they'd chosen to trust, Richard felt something he'd never experienced at the peak of his former empire. Peace. Not the peace of having no problems, but the peace of knowing he was finally building something that mattered. Preston could threaten all he wanted, but they'd already won the fight that mattered, the fight for integrity, for justice, and for proving that real power doesn't come from crushing others. It comes from lifting them up. 6 months after the trial, Richard stood before the modest building that would become the permanent home of Amara Technologies. It wasn't a gleaming skyscraper or a campus of modern glass structures. It was a refurbished community center in a neighborhood that had seen better days, surrounded by small businesses and residential blocks where families actually lived. The building had character: exposed brick walls, high ceilings with original wooden beams, and large windows that let in natural light. "What do you think?" Zuri asked, appearing beside him with blueprints rolled under her arm. "I think it's perfect," Richard said honestly. "It feels real." The renovation had been a community effort. Local contractors worked alongside their new employees, teaching job skills to young people from the neighborhood. Amara had insisted on hiring a diverse team, prioritizing talent and potential over pedigree and connections. The result was a workspace that felt alive, vibrant with voices and perspectives that Richard's old company had never included. The grand opening drew a crowd that surprised even Richard. Former employees came, curious investors attended, and journalists documented every moment. But the most important guests were the 50 young people from underprivileged backgrounds who'd received scholarships from the fund Richard had established with his court-awarded damages. Zuri stood at the podium, looking both nervous and radiant in a simple gray suit. The crowd quieted as she began to speak. 6 months ago, I was a community college student working part-time at a coffee shop, helping my mom make rent. Today, I'm standing here as CEO of a technology company that's redefining what ethical innovation looks like. She paused, letting the weight of that transformation settle over the audience. But this isn't really my story. It's ours. All of us who've been told we're not enough, not smart enough, not credentialed enough, not connected enough. This company exists to prove that talent doesn't come from privilege. It comes from opportunity. She gestured to the scholarship recipients in the front rows. These 50 students represent everything Amara Technologies believes in. They're brilliant minds who deserve a chance to show the world what they can do. Our scholarship program will cover their full tuition, provide mentorship, and guarantee internships here. Because we're not just building a company, we're building a pipeline for the next generation of innovators who might otherwise be overlooked. The applause was thunderous. Richard watched from the side of the stage, pride swelling in his chest. This remarkable young woman who'd once nervously offered to look at his broken computer was now commanding a room full of powerful people with grace and authority. Amara spoke next, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. I've spent most of my life being invisible, cleaning offices after everyone went home, picking up after people who never learned my name, working hard at jobs that society treats as disposable. But my daughter saw me. She saw my worth even when the world didn't. And now having my name on this building, on this company, it's not about ego or recognition. It's about remembering that every person has value regardless of what job they do or how much money they make. She looked directly at Richard. This company is named Amara Technologies not because of me, but because of what the name represents. Dignity, respect, the belief that everyone deserves to be seen. If we can build a successful business while treating every person with that same dignity, then we'll have accomplished something worth far more than profit. When Richard took the podium, he spoke without notes from a place of hard-earned humility. I built my first company on ambition and ego. I measured success in dollars and square footage. I hired people based on their resumes and fired them based on quarterly numbers, and I lost everything because I forgot the most important truth. Businesses don't succeed because of brilliant CEOs. They succeed because of talented people working together toward something meaningful. He gestured to Zuri and Amara. These two women saved me from my own arrogance. They taught me that real leadership means service, not authority, that innovation comes from diverse perspectives, not homogeneous boardrooms, that profit should be the result of doing good work, not the only goal that matters. Amara Technologies will succeed or fail based on whether we honor those principles, and I promise you, we will honor them. The crowd rose to their feet. Cameras flashed. Journalists scribbled notes. But Richard only saw the faces of the scholarship recipients, young people who reminded him of Zuri, brilliant, hungry, deserving of a chance they might never have gotten otherwise. After the ceremony, as people mingled in the newly renovated space, Richard found himself approached by a young woman who looked vaguely familiar. "Mr. Montgomery, I'm Emma Bradford. I used to work in your legal department at Montgomery Innovations." Richard searched his memory and came up empty. "I'm sorry, You wouldn't remember me. I was pretty junior, just out of law school. But I remember you." She smiled slightly. You walked past my desk every day for 2 years and never once acknowledged me. When I tried to bring concerns about contract irregularities to your attention, your assistant told me you didn't have time for entry-level observations. Richard felt shame wash over him. I'm sorry, I was an arrogant jerk, Emma finished, but her tone was gentle, not accusatory. Yeah, but so was I, honestly. I thought success meant clawing my way up, stepping on whoever I needed to step on. I left corporate law after the trial. Went to work for a nonprofit doing civil rights litigation. I make a third of what I used to, but I actually sleep at night. What made you come today? Richard asked. Curiosity, mostly. I wanted to see if you'd really changed, or if this was just good PR. She looked around at the diverse crowd, the scholarship students, the community members. Turns out you really did change. That gives me hope that change is possible for the rest of us, too. Similar conversations happened throughout the evening. Former employees shared stories of how Richard's transformation had inspired their own reevaluation of success and purpose. Investors talked about shifting their portfolios toward ethical companies. Students spoke about their dreams with a confidence that came from finally being believed in. As the crowd thinned and evening shadows stretched across the polished floors, Richard found Zuri in her new office, a modest space with a simple desk and walls lined with whiteboards covered in code and diagrams. You did good today, he said from the doorway. We did good, she corrected, not looking up from her laptop. This is all of ours. What are you working on? The next version of the algorithm. I'm trying to build in even better ethical safeguards. If we're going to license this to other companies, I want to make absolutely sure it can't be used for predatory practices. Richard sat in the chair across from her desk. You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just a kid who happened to know some coding. I had no idea I was looking at someone who'd revolutionize how I thought about everything. Zuri finally looked up, a slight smile on her face. And when I first met you, I thought you were an entitled billionaire who got what he deserved. Turns out we were both wrong about each other. Maybe that's the lesson in all this. We're all wrong about each other until we actually take the time to look. The first year of Amara Technologies was a whirlwind. They launched their ethical AI algorithm to significant market interest, licensing it to companies that passed their rigorous vetting process. Several major tech firms failed the vetting. Zuri refused to compromise on her standards, even when turning down lucrative deals. We could have made $3 million from that contract, one of their financial advisors argued during a board meeting, and compromised everything we stand for, Zuri countered. That company has a documented history of exploiting user data. I don't care how much money they're offering. We're not helping them do it more efficiently. Richard backed her completely. Zuri's right. We turn down any deal that contradicts our values, regardless of the price. Some investors grumbled, but others appreciated the consistency. Slowly, Amara Technologies built a reputation as a company that actually meant what it said. Their profits were modest compared to industry giants, but they were sustainable and clean. The scholarship program expanded beyond their initial 50 students. By year 2, they were supporting over 200 students from underserved communities, providing not just tuition, but mentorship, internships, and a clear path to meaningful careers in technology. Zuri became a sought-after speaker, invited to universities and tech conferences around the world. She spoke about ethical innovation, about the importance of diverse perspectives in technology, and about her journey from community college student to CEO. She never downplayed her humble beginnings. Instead, she emphasized them, showing young people that success didn't require privilege, just opportunity and determination. Amara, despite her initial reluctance about public attention, became the heart of the company's community outreach. She established partnerships with local schools, created job training programs for adults trying to change careers, and ensured that Amara Technologies remained connected to the neighborhood that housed them. We don't just take from this community, she told the local paper during an interview. We invest in it. These are our neighbors. Their success is our success. Richard found his role shifting over time. He handled business operations and investor relations, but he no longer dominated decision-making. Instead, he facilitated. He listened. He amplified Zuri and Amara's voices rather than overshadowing them with his own. It was harder than running his old company had been. Collaboration always is, but infinitely more rewarding. 3 years after the trial, Richard received an unexpected invitation to speak at Stanford's business school, the same institution where he'd once been a guest lecturer back when he measured success in market dominance and quarterly earnings. Standing before a new generation of MBA students, Richard told a different story than the one he'd once shared. When I last spoke here, I told you that success meant being the smartest person in the room, the hardest worker, the most ruthless negotiator. I told you that compassion was weakness and that you should never let emotion interfere with profit. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. I was wrong about everything. He told them about his fall, about Zuri and Amara, about learning that real strength meant admitting weakness and that real intelligence meant recognizing the brilliance in others. The company I run now is a fraction of what my old company made, but it creates more value, actual meaningful value, than anything I built before. We employ people who deserve opportunities. We develop technology that makes society better, not just richer. We measure success in lives changed, not just dollars earned. A student raised her hand. But isn't that idealistic? How do you compete with companies that don't have those constraints? By redefining what competition means, Richard replied. We're not trying to destroy our competitors or dominate markets. We're trying to prove that ethical business is viable business, and slowly, the market is responding. More investors want to fund purpose-driven companies. More consumers support businesses that align with their values. The game is changing, and the question is whether you want to win by the old rules or help write new ones. Another student asked, what about when ethics and profit conflict? What do you do then? We choose ethics every time, Richard said simply. And you know what's remarkable? In the long run, that choice usually turns out to be profitable anyway. Companies built on integrity attract loyal customers, dedicated employees, and patient investors. Companies built on exploitation might make more money faster, but they burn out quickly or get caught eventually. We're playing a different game with a longer timeline. After the lecture, dozens of students approached with questions. Many wanted to know how to balance ambition with integrity, how to succeed without compromising their values. Richard realized that this generation was asking different questions than his generation had. They'd seen enough corporate scandals, environmental destruction, and economic inequality to wonder if there might be a better way. There is a better way, he told a young woman who'd asked if ethical business was realistic. I'm living proof. But it requires giving up some things. Ego, shortcuts, the belief that you're entitled to success. In return, you get something far more valuable, the ability to look yourself in the mirror and actually like what you see. Meanwhile, Preston Hale's sentencing had been handed down. 5 years in federal prison for corporate sabotage, fraud, and theft of intellectual property. His assets were seized to pay restitution to the people he'd harmed. His name became a cautionary tale in business schools, a warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition. Richard felt no satisfaction in Preston's downfall. Instead, he felt sadness for the waste of it all. 2 men who could have built something great together, destroyed by pride and greed. One afternoon, Richard received a letter from Preston, mailed from the federal correctional facility where he was serving his sentence. The letter was brief. Richard, I've had a lot of time to think about what I did and why. I told myself I was ambitious, driven, willing to do what it took to succeed. The truth is, I was terrified. Terrified that I wasn't good enough, that I'd be exposed as a fraud, that everything I'd built would crumble, so I destroyed you before you could realize you didn't need me. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that watching you rebuild with grace and integrity has taught me more about leadership than I learned in 20 years of business school and corporate warfare. You were always better than I gave you credit for. I just couldn't see it through my own fear and jealousy. Preston. Richard read the letter twice, then filed it away. He didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Preston would have to find his own path to redemption, just as Richard had. Some lessons couldn't be taught. They had to be learned through consequence and reflection. 5 years after the trial, Amara Technologies had become a model for ethical business. Their algorithm was licensed by dozens of companies committed to responsible AI use. Their scholarship program had supported over 500 students, with a 93% graduation rate and a 100% job placement rate. Zuri, now 25, had been featured on the cover of major tech magazines, not as a curiosity, but as a serious innovator whose work was changing the industry. She'd been offered positions at Google, Microsoft, and Apple, all of which she'd turned down. "Why would I leave what we've built?" she told Richard when he asked about the offers. "Those companies want to hire me to make them look diverse and innovative. We actually are diverse and innovative. There's a difference." Amara had been recognized by the city for her community development work. The neighborhood around their headquarters had transformed. New businesses had opened, property values had stabilized, crime had decreased. The company had become an anchor for positive change, proving that corporations could be forces for good if they chose to be. Richard, now in his early 60s, found himself thinking about legacy. Not the legacy of buildings with his name on them or companies that would outlast him, but the legacy of lives changed, opportunities created, principles upheld. One evening, the three of them sat on the roof of their building, watching the sun set over the city. They did this occasionally, taking time away from the constant demands of running a successful company to remember why they were doing it. "I've been thinking about succession planning," Richard said, breaking the comfortable silence. Zuri laughed. "You're not dying, Richard. You're not even retired." "No, but I'm also not planning to do this forever. And when I step back, I want to make sure this company continues to honor what we built." "It will," Amara said confidently. "Because we didn't build it on one person's vision. We built it on shared values. Those don't disappear when one person leaves." "Still," Richard persisted, "I want to establish some kind of charter, something that legally binds the company to its principles, even if ownership changes or market pressures increase. A constitution, basically, for what Amara Technologies stands for." They spent the next several weeks drafting that document, working with lawyers to create legally binding commitments to ethical practices, community investment, diverse hiring, transparent business operations, and profit sharing with employees. It wasn't perfect. No document could cover every future scenario. But it was a foundation, a clear statement of intent that would guide the company long after they were gone. The charter was adopted unanimously by the board, with provisions making it nearly impossible to override. Amara Technologies was now legally committed to being the kind of company they'd envisioned from the start. 7 years after Richard's fall, he was invited to speak at an international innovation summit in Singapore. The invitation came with an unusual request. They wanted him to share the stage with Zuri, specifically highlighting their partnership and how it had transformed both the company and the industry. Standing before thousands of attendees from around the world, Richard told their story one more time. But this time, he insisted that Zuri tell most of it. "Once, someone told me I couldn't be of much help," she began. And Richard heard the callback to that first night in his penthouse, when he'd been too arrogant to recognize the lifeline she was offering. He was wrong, but he was also right, in a way. I couldn't help him rebuild what he'd lost. Instead, we built something entirely new together. She walked the audience through their journey, the evidence discovery, the trial, the company launch, the challenges and triumphs. She spoke about the importance of diverse perspectives in technology, about how her experience as a young black woman from a working-class background gave her insights that traditional tech leaders often missed. "Innovation doesn't come from everyone thinking the same way," she said. It comes from bringing together people with different experiences, different struggles, different perspectives, and letting them challenge each other's assumptions. Richard had to lose everything before he could see that. I hope the rest of you won't need to fall that far before you learn the same lesson. When she finished, the audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Richard stood with them, applauding the remarkable woman who'd saved his life by refusing to let him wallow in self-pity and arrogance. After the speech, they were approached by representatives from major corporations, non-profits, and government agencies, all wanting to know how to replicate what they'd built. Richard and Zuri patiently explained that there was no formula, no shortcut. It required genuine commitment to values over profit, people over metrics, long-term thinking over quarterly earnings. But doesn't that limit your growth? A corporate executive asked. It limits certain kinds of growth, Zuri acknowledged. We'll never be the biggest tech company or the most profitable, but we'll be sustainable, ethical, and meaningful. For us, that's better than being biggest. Flying home from Singapore, Richard looked out the airplane window at the clouds below and reflected on how far he'd come. 7 years ago, he'd lost everything and thought his life was over. Now he had something more valuable than any empire: purpose, partnership, and peace. "What are you thinking about?" Zuri asked from the seat beside him. "I'm thinking that if I could go back and prevent the crash, prevent Preston's betrayal, keep my old company intact, I wouldn't do it." Zuri raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Really, because I wouldn't have met you. Your mother wouldn't have become my partner. I'd still be that arrogant man who measured worth in dollar signs and treated people like tools. I'd rather be who I am now, even with all the pain it took to get here." "That's growth," Zuri said with a smile. "The real kind, not the kind you see on a balance sheet." 10 years after the trial, Amara Technologies celebrated a decade of operation with a ceremony at their headquarters. The building had expanded to include an innovation lab, a community education center, and office space that now housed over 300 employees. The scholarship program had supported over 1,000 students. 43% of their employees had come through that program. The company had launched similar initiatives in 5 other cities, creating a network of ethical tech companies committed to the same principles. Amara, now in her late 50s, stood before the gathered employees, scholarship recipients, and community members with quiet dignity. 10 years ago, I was a cleaning woman whose biggest dream was making sure my daughter could finish college. Today, I'm co-founder of a company that's changing lives. Not just our lives, but hundreds of lives. Students who found opportunities, employees who found purpose, communities that found partnership. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm not special. I just had the privilege of raising a special daughter and working alongside a man who learned that true power comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down." Richard spoke last, his silver hair now completely white, his face lined with age but softened by contentment. "When people ask me about my legacy, they expect me to talk about the company. But that's not my legacy. My legacy is Zuri." He looked at the young woman who'd become like a daughter to him. "She didn't just save my company. She saved me from becoming a bitter old man full of regrets. She showed me that failure isn't the end. It's just a different beginning." He turned to address the full audience. "If you take one thing from our story, let it be this. You never know who will change your life. It might be someone you overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. Stay humble enough to recognize brilliance wherever it appears. Stay open enough to accept help from unexpected places, and stay grateful enough to honor the people who saw your potential when you couldn't see it yourself." As the ceremony concluded and people mingled in celebration, Richard found himself alone for a moment on the same rooftop, where he, Zuri, and Amara had spent so many evenings planning and dreaming. Zuri found him there, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Hiding from your own party?" she teased. "Reflecting," he corrected. This place, this company, this life. It's everything I didn't know I needed. We should write a book, Zuri suggested. Tell the whole story properly. What would we call it? Zuri smiled, remembering that first night when she'd walked into his penthouse and found a broken man staring at a blank screen. How about Can I Take a Look? That's where it all started. Richard laughed, the sound genuine and free. Perfect. Because that question changed everything. I just had to be broken enough to say yes. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker to life as darkness settled over the streets. Below them, the building hummed with life. Employees finishing projects, students attending class, community members gathering for evening programs. You know what the best part is? Richard said quietly. What? None of this exists because of my brilliance or my money or my connections. It exists because your mother had compassion for a fallen man, and you had the courage to help someone who didn't deserve it. Everything good in my life now traces back to kindness I did nothing to earn. You earned it, Zuri said, by being humble enough to accept it and wise enough to change because of it. That's generous. It's true. Anyone can fall, Richard. Not everyone gets back up differently than they fell. You did. As they headed back downstairs to rejoin the celebration, Richard thought about the two paths his life could have taken. One led to bitterness, isolation, and the slow death of a man consumed by ego and regret. The other led here, to this building, this company, these people, this purpose. The difference between those paths was a single question, asked by a young woman who saw past his failure to the potential for something better. Can I take a look? He'd scoffed at the time, certain she couldn't help. He'd been wrong about that, as he'd been wrong about so many things. But being wrong had led him to truth. Falling had taught him to rise. Losing everything had shown him what actually mattered, and in the end, that made all the difference. Back in the celebration, surrounded by the community they'd built together, Richard raised his glass in a toast. To second chances, to unexpected teachers, and to the people brave enough to say, "Can I take a look?" When the rest of the world has given up. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Amara and Zuri stood on either side of him, three unlikely partners bound together by circumstance and choice, by failure and redemption, by the simple truth that sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never saw coming. The story that began with a fall ended with a foundation, not of glass and steel, but of principle and partnership, built to last long after they were gone. If you lost everything tomorrow, would you have the humility to accept help from the people you've spent your life overlooking? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories about redemption, justice, and the unexpected heroes who change everything.